It's time for the Bible's greatest mysteries. Welcome. I'm Derek Gilbert.
I'm Sharon Gilbert. I thought you were going to say science. We're going to tell you a little bit about Sci Friday in a minute. But for now, welcome to our barn. We're so glad you've chosen to join us on the return of the Bible's greatest mysteries.
We are really happy to be doing this again. This was a program that was developed and inspired by the late Dr. Tom Horn. He's been gone a whole year now.
I can't believe that.
No, it is.
That's just...
Every day is a little strange waking up in a world without Tom Horn in it, and Mike Heiser for that matter.
It is. And I'll tell you one, this morning, I was preparing my talk for the Skywatch TV virtual conference, which is November 30th.
Right, is when it goes live.
Is when it goes live. And by that we mean you can binge it, watch it in whatever order you want to. All of the files will be there on November 30th. Before I recorded, I wanted to get it all written out. And I wanted some of the opinions from Tom Horn. So I was going through all of my folders for Tom Horn chapters and things he said, things he wrote in the magazine back in the day when I was laying it out. And I just got so nostalgic because when you do a search in your folders, in your documents for Tom Horn, I get all these photographs. And I miss him so much, and I just know he would not come back for anything as much as he loves us, loves his family, loves ministry, but he is with the Lord.
Amen to that. Well, that is what we all have to look forward to, but and one of the reasons we can be sure that the promises of a place to come, one of the reasons we know that these promises are absolutely guaranteed is because of the precision of prophecy. We've talked in other programs about how Daniel was given by Gabriel in the 70 weeks prophecy, the arrival date of Messiah in Jerusalem to the day.
Absolutely. We also get the prophecy of Cyrus, who is referred to as my shepherd. Now think about that. Think about that. We are getting ready to go into an election season. By the time you're watching this, elections are going to be even closer. November 5th, which oddly enough over in the UK is sort of, it's bonfire night because it's the night that they...
Guy Fawkes Day?
Guy Fawkes Day.
Yeah.
Which is all about other things. But we're going to be electing a president, and it's very likely that won't be a smooth transition, however it goes. Yeah. But the Lord raises up kings. He raises up princes, he raises up our leaders, and he tears them down. Right. And we see this in the episode we're about to discuss today, which has to do with Belshazzar.
Yes. This is a very famous story. We've all heard it in church, the story of the handwriting on the wall. In fact, that's become a byword, a catchphrase. What's the word I'm looking for? A proverb almost. The writing is on the wall. When something has become...
Whatever it is.
Something has become so obvious that the writing is on the wall. Well, this is the story from which this comes, but there's more to it than we've been taught. So, what was the context of the story? You mentioned Belshazzar.
Yeah, well, we get the information in the text in Daniel. And remember, Daniel is the one who told the king or the regent, because it was probably the regent at that point, or was it Nebuchadnezzar?
Belshazzar was the regent. Nabonidus was the king.
But originally, he told Nebuchadnezzar about the statue.
Right. This was like almost 50 years previous.
My point is that he was a well-known interpreter of dreams. And other phenomena. So the so-called experts couldn't figure it out. Well, Belshazzar is having a big meal. Now, there are scholars who believe that this probably occurred in or about October of 539, I think, BC.
539 BC, right.
So if this is in what we would call October, and it is rationalizing it or comparing it to our Gregorian calendar, so October-ish and possibly October 3rd.
Okay.
Or thereabouts. So early October. It was in the month of Tashritu, according to the Jewish calendar. And I looked it up today, and there is one possibility, and we'll get to that in a minute, as to the specific date on the Jewish calendar, again, in a minute. But he was having a big meal with all these buddies coming in and deciding that, oh, you know what? Let's do something really important. Let's show how powerful we are and how, mind you, this is at a point when the Persians have taken over most of their territory.
Right.
So all they had was this little enclave left.
Mm-hmm.
Little did they know it was being undermined at the time.
Right.
And
Literally. Yeah.
Literally. And we'll get to undermining a little later. But yes, it was being undermined so that they didn't know they were about to be invaded. They should have. They should have.
Well,
they were overconfident.
Yeah. No, I think they probably did know that the Persians were nearly at the gates.
My point is they were so confident in their walls.
That they were busy holding a drunken feast.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So they're sitting there, he and with all his buddies. And Belshazzar is the regent.
Mm-hmm.
He is not the king. He's the son of the king. And he decides that, let's do something special.
Yeah.
Let's show our God that we think he's really top of the pantheon.
Well,
this other God that these Jewish, exiles, let's bring in all the plate from the temple in Jerusalem.
Right. All the utensils that have been consecrated.
All the gold, the silver,
Right.
anything of value, let's bring it in, and we'll use that for our table service.
Right. Now, the text of Daniel 5 calls Belshazzar, refers to Nebuchadnezzar as his father. Now, in the biblical sense, that's not, rather in the genetic sense, that's not true.
He may be grandfather. He may be uncle.
Well, no, he was not. And I'll explain what I mean here. The father was referring to the predecessor in the royal line,
Mm-hmm.
but Nabonidus had actually seized power. Nabonidus was the father of Belshazzar. Nebuchadnezzar was the king of Babylon who destroyed Jerusalem and carried off those temple utensils, all the gold and silver from the temple, in 586 BC. So Daniel had been around in Babylon for a long, long time by this point. But in between Nebuchadnezzar and Nabonidus, there were a couple of descendants of Nebuchadnezzar who did ascend to the throne, but Nabonidus seized power. Nabonidus was probably actually an Assyrian. He was not even a Chaldean.
Yes, but he still claimed to be king. That's my point.
Well, sure.
That happens all the time in dynasties.
Right.
They switch over to a different dynasty because either there's no heir or someone comes along with a bigger club.
Exactly. So the reference to Nebuchadnezzar as the father of Belshazzar was in the sense...
I think I said Nabonidus. Sorry, I meant Nabonidus. He was the spiritual descendant, yes, indeed.
Of Nebuchadnezzar, right.
Because
But
he
yes,
was
Nabonidus was his father.
And this was the throne that claimed to be the King of Kings.
Right. So Nebuchadnezzar, some 50 years earlier, had taken Jerusalem, knocked down the walls, destroyed the temple, carried off all the service,
Mhm.
and now Belshazzar, as the regent, the prince, essentially, the crown prince of the
drunken
Chaldeans.
crown prince.
Apparently, the drunken crown prince was holding a feast, and for all of his lords. In fact, the Bible makes it very clear: a great feast for 1,000 of his lords, and drank wine in front of the thousands. And when he tasted the wine, commanded that the vessels of gold and silver that Nebuchadnezzar, his father, again, not his literal father, but previous king of Babylon, had taken out of the temple in Jerusalem. So this is the context for what's going on.
And may I suggest that it was more than just his buddies, the lords, the sort of court or the courtiers, that it was also the priests.
Most likely, yes.
Because it's very likely this was a liturgical dinner of some kind.
Yes, exactly. So there are really two aspects to this dinner. Number one is the timing of this all and the meaning of what was written on the wall. But secondly, the timing and how that relates to what you call the liturgical setting, the ritual aspect of the feast. So you want to deal with them separately and then kind of wrap things up?
Well, I'll tell you what, we're going to take a short break, and a very short one. And when we come back, we're going to let Derek present his argument, and then we'll take another break and I will present mine.
One of the best ways to learn spiritual warfare is through fiction. And we've got a special offer during the month of November at the Gilbert House store.
I'm very thankful for that. Get that
Thanksgiving.
sorted.
I see what you did.
And it is the first two books of the Laodicea Chronicles, along with book 2.5, perhaps, The God Conspiracy, because in that, Derek uses some of my characters.
So the first two books of the Laodicea Chronicles, Sharon's first novel, Winds of Evil, and a book that suddenly became a lot more relevant in the last few years, The Armageddon Strain.
It's very relevant. H5N1 is right in there.
And The God Conspiracy builds on The Armageddon Strain. You'll find some of the characters shared back and forth. But the bottom line is this: We face principalities and powers. We write about those in these novels, and you get all 3 books plus the Best of Sci Friday Volume 2 for just $45. This is more than $80 value, just $45 plus shipping and handling right now at gilberthouse.org/store. Welcome back to the Bible's Greatest Mysteries. I'm Derek Gilbert.
I'm Sharon Gilbert, and we want to remind you that right now, till the end of October, maybe a few days into November, we've still got the Gates of Hell offer. It's the October special, and you can get this and 3 DVDs along with it for $45.
$45 plus shipping and handling.
Crazy.
And we sign the books as we send them out. So
whether you want it or not, we find it.
So please take advantage of that. You'll also find other specials at our store. We've got, well, we'll talk about those later, but
Yes.
other merchandise like these
we got,
wonderful mugs here,
and
t-shirts and caps and
for
so
the
forth.
Red Wing Saga, and for GHTV. We've got caps, which I really could use one right now because I'm still very sensitive to light, but boy, oh boy, we promised. Okay.
Yeah.
And now the floor goes to Mr. Gilbert.
Okay. Do we want to talk about the definition of many, tekel, and parsin, or do we want to deal with the
Let's
timing?
get to that, the timing first.
Okay, the timing of this. You mentioned October 3rd, which is in the fall. And the month of Tishri, it's in the Babylonian calendar, that would be Tashritu. And according to scholar Al Wohlers and Paul Allen, scholars Paul Allen Bulio and Al Walters, there is as you say, a religious significance to this. According to the Chronicle, and I'm reading from Paul Allen Bulio in his book called The Reign of Nabonidus, King of Babylon. According to the Chronicle, Babylon was taken on the 16th of Tashritu, accepting that Nabonidus imposed new features of the cult of Sin, the moon god, in the capital after his return from Tema. Now, he spent 10 years at Tema. Tema was an oasis in the desert that was a center of the moon god cult. And Nabonidus...
Mind you, the god of the city was supposed to be Marduk.
Marduk, right. And this did not make the priests of Marduk happy. Nabonidus was, as I mentioned before, he was probably an Assyrian. He came from the city of Harran in northern Mesopotamia. That was actually the city from which Abraham began his journey to Canaan. It's in southern Turkey today.
And the other irony here is that Nabonidus' name has Nabu in it,
Yes.
which is not Marduk and it's not Sin.
No, yes, it's true. It means, his name means Nabu be praised. Yeah.
And yet he's going after the moon god.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, his mother was a priestess of the moon god at Harran. The cities in ancient Mesopotamia that were centers of the moon god cult, the city of Ur, where the great ziggurat of Ur was dedicated to the moon god, Harran, where Abraham came from in northern Mesopotamia, and Tema, that oasis in the desert, and then also Jericho, Yarik, which was the Amorite name for the moon god.
Yes.
So those were the centers of the moon god cult. Accepting that Nabonidus imposed new features of the cult of Sin in the capital after his return from Tema, it is conceivable that festivals linked with the cult of Sin at Harran were transplanted to Babylon, perhaps even the Akitu festival. Now, the Akitu festival was an annual thing. For Marduk, it was conducted in the spring. But for Sin, it was conducted in the fall. This festival, according to Bulio, started on the 17th of Tashritu. As Babylon was captured on the eve of the 17th, the festivities mentioned by Herodotus, who was a Greek historian, and the book of Daniel may have been those of the Harran Akitu festival as celebrated in the capital by supporters of Nabonidus. The fall, the festival of Sin, the Akitu festival, was celebrated in the fall. And we see this oddly kind of reflected in the Jewish calendar today, where there's the actual new year begins in the spring on the 1st of Nisan. But then there's also a fall festival, Rosh Hashanah, which is head of the year on the 1st of Tishri.
Yes.
So you've got, apparently a new year in the spring and a new year in the fall, but, and they were both celebrated in various cities in Mesopotamia.
And they're 6 months apart because the new year was the first month.
Right.
Tishri is the
Seventh month. That is correct. Now, Al Walters writes this. The 17th of Tashritu always fell during one of the 2 periods of the year that the moon had an unusually prominent place at night.
And we just recently had that kind of moon.
Right here, yes. It should also be remembered that the harvest moon and hunter's moon, by a curious trick of perception, are popularly believed to be unusually large and luminous.
Yes.
Supermoons, right. It is therefore singularly appropriate that the Akitu festival in honor of the moon god Sin should take place on the 17th of Tashritu, when the lunar deity, several days after the full moon, retained its sway throughout the night. Now, what's significant about this, in my view, is that it was captured on the eve of the 17th of Tashritu, so the night of the 16th. The Feast of Tabernacles begins on the 15th of Tashritu. So Sukkot, the most important festival or feast in the Jewish calendar, during which 7-day period, 70 bulls are slaughtered to represent the gods of the nations from whom Yahweh was rescuing his people.
70 meaning all of them.
All of them, right. That began the day before, and then the second day of Sukkot, Feast of Tabernacles, Belshazzar brings out the utensils consecrated to Yahweh for his drunken celebration, his ritual feast for the moon god, Sin.
So Belshazzar has this drunken feast.
Right.
That is at a time that is important in the Jewish feast calendar.
Right, exactly.
What I find really interesting about this is you get a number of deities that are involved in this. Because I want to remind everybody, we don't see them, but we are walking, living our daily lives in a reality that is beyond our perception. The unseen realm, as the late Dr. Michael Heiser referred to it, is filled with these small g gods, these created beings who were sent here after Babel, and they decided they liked being worshipped. So they go by a number of different names, and it can be the same deity with a different name in another part of the world, but still that same office, the moon god or whatever. So we have a number of deities involved. We have the moon god. And it is possibly a festival to the moon god.
Right.
And it was possibly a night with a full moon.
Yes.
That's a supermoon.
A supermoon, right.
We also have Marduk, and he is...
Marduk took the place of Enlil at the top of the pantheon in the same way that the storm god Baal took the place of El in western Mesopotamia, Zeus replacing Kronos, Saturn being replaced by Jupiter.
So he's
Marduk,
the storm god.
Although technically he's not the storm god. This is one of the things that he's got storm god attributes, okay? But the storm god, the one whose Sumerian logogram, which is like Sumerian hieroglyphics, the same symbol that was applied to Baal in the west was applied to another entity called Ishkur in Sumer. So Ishkur is Baal, but Marduk occupies the same slot in the pantheon. And this is why I think Marduk is actually the prince of Persia, in conflict with Baal's Zeus Jupiter, because he ascended to the top of the pantheon in eastern Mesopotamia and Persia under the name Ahura Mazda.
Okay, we'll get to that in a minute, because I've got something to say about that will get me off this list, and my brain can't hold all this. So we've got Sin, Marduk.
Right.
We also have Yahweh. And we have Bel, because that's in Belshazzar's name.
Yeah, but Bel was just the title of Marduk.
Yes,
right.
But which means Lord.
Yeah.
We also have Nabu.
Yes.
Marduk at the time was supposed to be the prince of the city. This is why I said this is really interesting.
Correct, yes.
Said that. When you named a city Babylon, it just referred to you had a god gate. It's like, we're big enough that we've got a god gate and a god of the city, so now we're officially a city. We're not a town. We're not a village.
Right.
We're a city with
important.
a big old god gate. Yeah, we're important. You have to worship and pay some money to get in. So Nabu was a deity that I'm going to get to when I start my defense that I find extremely interesting about all this. So we've got a number of small g gods plus the Creator Almighty who is in a position that seems weak at the time. Right.
The Chaldeans who ruled Babylon must have thought that Yahweh was not a very important God because he allowed, or powerful God, because he allowed his people, the Judeans, the Jews, to be carried off into Babylon. And so they probably didn't think much of making use of his temple utensils as part of this festival to Sin. Now, the other aspect of this is that the invasion of the Persians had already been ongoing for a while. It's not like they suddenly showed up outside the gates, the walls of Babylon, and took Babylon by surprise. Mm-hmm. That's not how warfare worked in the ancient world. The reason Nabonidus, the king, was not in Babylon is that he was leading the army, and there was a battle at a site called Opis, which is north of Baghdad, which is about, it would have been about 60 miles or so, roughly, from Babylon. And 2 weeks before this took place, as you said, October 3rd, roughly, or thereabouts, this battle took place, and the Chaldean army was routed, was defeated, and Nabonidus may have been killed at that battle. So clearly runners from the army would have informed the regent that the army is defeated and the Medes and the Persians are on their way here.
You'd think so, wouldn't you?
So what may have been, it's depicted in the book of Daniel as just this drunken feast by a king who's wanting to show off, may have been a way to try to harness the power of their patron deity, the moon god, which again was at full and a supermoon at that point, against the Medes and the Persians. And I say this because, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, after the battle, after the war, Cyrus was the victor. He sent all of the idols that Nabonidus had collected into Babylon for divine protection back to their cities.
Yes.
And that also affected the Jews.
Okay, I'm going to speak for you if you are confused at this point, because Nabonidus was trying to move everything over to worshiping the moon god.
Correct.
Belshazzar, he's got Bel, but it's Lord in his name. But Marduk is supposed to be the prince, the god of the city.
Right.
If Marduk was another name for the prince of Persia, then essentially he's invading himself.
Well, or he's just collecting territory that belongs to himself at this point.
Because let us not forget, at one point, the prince of Persia is replaced by the prince from Greece.
Yeah, that takes place a couple centuries later,
Yes, exactly.
which Daniel also foresaw.
Yes, he did.
And again, this is not a widely held belief, but again, there are some scholars who believe that Marduk and Ahura Mazda are just the same deity under different names.
It's very difficult to know for sure.
Right, yeah. And we've been asked many times, can you draw us a chart? It's like, it would really be confusing. Trust me, it would be a lot of scribbles and lines because these entities lie and they go by different names.
A lot of Venn diagrams.
We just don't go there. So the priesthood of Marduk was already feeling ouchy because Nabonidus was trying to overturn about 500 years of tradition in Babylon. Marduk had been elevated to the chief spot in the pantheon around the time of Saul in Israel. So in the 11th century BC, that's when Marduk really became the top of the pantheon, and Enlil was sort of demoted to a judge in the netherworld.
Oh, yes.
Okay, so Enlil, who was also El or Molech or, anyway.
A titan.
A titan, one of the
ones
titans.
who is in Tartarus.
Exactly. And so in the official religion, in the official religion of Babylon, in Mesopotamia, which was imposed on Mesopotamia, Marduk became the chief deity. Well, Nabonidus, because his mom was a priestess of Sin, he was a devotee of Sin from Harran, brought these practices to Babylon, and then he spent 10 years away from the city of Babylon in this center of the moon god called Tema. Why? Possibly doing homage to his god, but also because Tema had close access to the spice road leading from southern Arabia to the port at Gaza, which, when Babylon controlled that, was able to finance Babylon's building projects and army and stuff.
Was Tema close to Taman? Was this down in the Petra area?
It was in northern Arabia, so not close to Petra per se, but it was in that general vicinity. But anyway, it allowed him to really refill the coffers. It's like all politicians, they want more tax money. But because he was at Tema, he was not able to fulfill the duty of the king, which required him to be in Babylon for the spring Akitu festival, for the ritual, where they replayed the story of Marduk defeating Tiamat, the chaos dragon.
So, as they're sitting there, imbibing and getting more and more smashed, unaware or oblivious of the fact that the Persians are undermining and going to enter their city with essentially very little fighting.
And perhaps because of the help of the priesthood of Marduk, who some think opened the gates for Cyrus.
Well, yes, which is really interesting if you think some of those priests that might have been either invited or uninvited to the party.
Exactly.
It's similar to the big dinner that Jezebel used to have. That she would invite all the priests and all her buddies and all the various lords or whatever, and they got to eat with her. This was a celebration. This was ritualistic. It wasn't just, hey, we're hungry, let's have a meal. So he's getting there and he's getting drunk, and a hand or fingers, gigantic, appear and write something on the wall.
Right. Many, many tekel and parson.
Check out Uparson.
Yeah. And it in the ESV, uparson, but it can mean and parson is the translation in the ESV.
And we're going to leave you hanging because we're running out of time for this episode. However, I have my rebuttal. And we will discuss that writing on the wall and what it may mean and how it might indicate the first of the Babylon is fallen.
Yeah, okay. There's a lot of interesting stuff going on. A lot of moving parts here because Nabu is involved in that as a god of commerce.
Yes.
So yes, much more to come as we continue discussing Daniel and the writing on the wall next time on the Bible's Greatest Mysteries.